Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanic. And if you enjoy this fanic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanic like this. And now let's start the fanic.
Onoki looked out in disgust across the remaining joint force assaulting this flyspeck of a village. True, the combined military strength of 4 major villages and several smaller villages lashed together was impressive. However, this combined might had just taken the middle ring after 7 days of pitched combat. The blood price for that precious parcel of land had been horrific. If he had known when the cages sat down to plan this that he would lose a third of his forces before ever claiming the beachhead, he would have turned his back on the whole scheme. Now he was committed. Now it was too late to turn back. The emergency cage summit had divided the main island, in this cluster of 1 large and 3 smaller land masses, into a series of 4 concentric rings labeled the outer, middle, inner, and core. The outermost ring consisted of 200 yards of shoal water and the first 50 yards of beachhead, and that ring had cost nearly a full third of all combined forces. It was supposed to be a quick landing, an easy and overwhelming victory against a single clan. Onoki glanced down at yet another bloody allied corpse floating past the ship's prow just to get hooked by line and tackle manned by the Sea Sprite's crew and shook his head. So much for easy. Shoal waters around this island were filled with devastating whirlpools, and very competent Uzu water jutsu users, while the beachhead was a sluggish morass of sand and very deadly earth jutsu users capable of using lethal earth and sand techniques. The Tsuchikage hadn't seen fighters this deadly since the Second Great Shinobi War, and his Suna allies were hard-pressed to take the beachhead from them in order to secure the landing. It had taken 4 days to get that far, with Suna forces rotating out in the constant assault. It had been brutal, and the Uzumaki were ruthlessly unforgiving. The many broken invaders floating in the bloody shoal water and lying along the even bloodier shore bore silent testament to that fact. Never piss off the Uzumaki. Wasn't that the old saying? Onoki, the Sandaime Tsuchikage of Iwagakure no Sato, grimaced. He now faced an entire clan of embattled Uzumaki, and it was a sobering concept. Sharks were beginning to surface belly up as a result of their frenzied gorging on human flesh. In their mindless buffet, they'd eaten until their stomachs burst. Such was the greed of shinobi trying to plunder Uzushiogakure for the greatest secrets of the clan. Too bad their bodies seemed to explode upon death, often taking enemy combatants with them. Men, women, children, it didn't matter, as they all burst into an enormous gout of flame upon death. Another explosion just past the beachline punctuated that grim thought, with more red-clad body parts sailing through the air. Onoki shook his head again and looked at the remaining tally of shinobi still in fighting condition under his command. There were far too few in Iwa Red for his comfort. Sighing once again at the cost of this battle, Onoki wondered how many generations it would take for his village to bounce back from today's losses. The obvious answer was many, but it was not a reality he wanted to face at the moment. Too many, if you asked his honest opinion. Onoki couldn't fault them, the Uzumaki clan. They were fighting for their very existence against nations that had traded willingly and peacefully for goods and services with the island clan only a week ago. It was the height of hypocrisy and treachery. The Uzumaki were due their outrage. However, Onoki still had a job to do, and he would see it through. This was the shinobi way after all. What a colossal waste this was on both sides as a result of following the path of shinobi. Defenders had long since evacuated villagers from the outer and inner ring sections, employing a scorched earth-style retreat. They left nothing for the invaders to use against them and fought to their last breath. Every inch gained cost dearly in blood, oft times 20 to 30 invaders for each defender. The only consolation being that fewer and fewer defenders were being encountered further up the shoreline, which initially raised the morale of invading forces, until those same invaders discovered that it cost more lives to defeat those fewer defenders, and each concentric ring was more difficult to capture. The answer was simple. Defenders were stronger the further in you pushed, and it cost you more to push farther inland. Onoki saw the logic behind this and wept a silent tear in tribute to the noble Uzumaki clan. The weaker defenders filled the outer rings with the sole purpose of draining chakra from the invaders. As invaders moved further inland, they encountered stronger opposition capable of overlapping their area of influence and increasing their defensive power, which, in turn, required more effort, resources and time to overcome. Onoki could see the fire in the eyes of the defending Uzumaki clan members and watched in silence as they stoically fought tooth and nail until that light faded, usually after reaching physical or chakra exhaustion, making them vulnerable to a killing blow. Even in death they were silent warriors, no begging or pleading. And the damnable berserkers still exploded when they died. They knew another dawn for the Uzumaki would not come. They knew they were going to die to the last man, woman, and child. They knew this was a bitter war of attrition and each defender was doing their utmost to make the invaders pay in rivers of blood. They also knew they were succeeding. Standing afloat in the outer ring with little under half the combined invasion force remaining, Onoki's eyes grew wide as sake saucers as they looked beyond his remaining ground troops to the inner ring and core holding the fabled Uzumaki shrine. They needed to hurry. Beyond the three youths standing on the temple grounds, powerful chakra was rumbling in the earth below. He could feel the thrumming vibrations through his pointed shoes and feared one final strike of retribution from the vengeful clan. Their fury was legendary, almost as legendary as their skill with Fuin. This told him the invaders were running out of time. Jiraiya could not take his eyes from the intricate seals being laid over every square inch of the clan shrine. All of the remaining seal masters of Clan Uzumaki had gathered and were calmly layering fresh ink in intricate and sequentially linked patterns around the base of each column, the surrounding colonnades, and the shrine entry itself. Not a single one appeared rushed or panicked despite the ringing thunder and flashes of fire, lightning and other elements wreaking havoc in the inner village just beyond the clan enclosure. A great village was going to die today, ruthlessly stamped out by the combined greed and fear of the elemental nations, and he and his teammates could do nothing to prevent it. That Konoha was complacent in the act nearly made him retch where he stood. He glanced to his left and right, taking in the stoic faces at his sides. Orochimaru was looking behind the small group, apprehension wrinkling the inner corner of his eyebrows just enough to make his smooth forehead pucker. People were fighting and dying with fanatical furor just beyond the compound gates, and they were running out of time. It was clear on his face, his left hand twitching every time a defender died. Tsunade was nervously glancing in the same direction, her hands and jaw clenched as she watched suffering spread through this peaceful village of Fuinjutsu masters, the last of a greatly skilled clan that had faithfully allied itself with Konoha for generations. She knew the Uzumaki were related to her Senju clan and that this was her extended family spilling their life's blood into the already sodden earth to buy time for the final ceremony taking place deep within the shrine behind her. In her pained eyes, Konoha's treachery knew no greater shame. With one last heaving sigh, the self-proclaimed Toad Sage wrenched his eyes from the commiserating faces of his team and back to the large double doors of the Uzumaki temple, the happy-go-lucky lecher nowhere to be found. Uzumaki Mito's face, the second Uzumaki to bear that name, was grim. Deep in the lower levels of their clan shrine, the most sacred of places, her face was set as unyielding as the alabaster stone lining the ritual chamber all around her. She was tiring of Hachiko's pleading and dreading the outcome if this final ploy to save her clan's legacy. We will speak of this no more. The Sword Maiden's pleas died on her lips as she knew all too well what that phrase meant if she pressed the issue further. Looking to her old friend and mentor, Mito glanced up to the village above their heads to the latest sounds of artificially made thunder and silently urged them to finish the ceremony. One did not simply rush the most complicated ceremony in the history of Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. How much more time do you need? She asked between clenched teeth, trying clearly to hide her desperation. It pained her that her family legacy would break after her mother held it together for so long, but every story must end eventually. If only it wasn't during her short time as temporary elder. They hadn't even appointed a permanent replacement after her mother died shortly after the ceremony of transition. Shaking loose her morbid thoughts, She snapped her eyes back to the old man puttering through his ceremony. If he heard her question at all, the wizened scholar never broke his string of hand seals, completing the 70th one, and slammed his bloody palm into the seal beneath his feet. The seal began to pulse, then glow with a steady stream of red energy that slowly bled to white, matching the 8 other seals beneath the feet of 8 similarly garbed, hooded and kneeling Uzumaki clan masters. Once all 9 seals were a steady stream of white energy, tendrils out forming archaic glyphs interlocking each seal to the central master seal, then linking to their adjacent counterpart, making a glowing wheel hub and center spoke design. Ayanaga Uzumaki lifted his head, eyes softening in a final farewell, as he memorized for the final time the loving face of a very young Mito Uzumaki, the last ruling Uzumaki of the village hidden among the whirling tides. Mito smiled briefly, then spun on her heel, slim wooden box in hand, and ascended out of the lower shrine before the seals ceased pulsing, wisps of chakra floating to the tiled ceiling. Once outside, Mito headed straight for the 3 Konoha Junin waiting patiently near the entrance. The double doors behind her closed with a hiss, a burning energy lining the door frame as potent seals activated, causing the compound and earth surrounding it to shake violently, as she focused on the white-haired ringleader. Jiraiya's eyebrows raised to his hairline as she thrust the ornately inscribed and heavily lacquered box into his arms. It was seamless with no visible locks or keyholes, the clan symbols breathtakingly inlaid with gold centered on the surface where a lid should be. "Are you sure you won't come with us?" He knew her answer, but he would ask one last time just to be sure. "You know that I cannot, Jiraiya-san. It will not end so long as I draw breath, and Sarutobi," she hissed his name almost as a curse, "remains Hokage. You know that he will not endanger his village for our sakes." There were heavy doses of anger and resentment in that statement, causing all 3 Junin to turn confused faces to the very beautiful royal, all arguments of persuasion left to the wayside. "I am placing great faith in you to make sure Uzumaki Kushina receives this." Her stony gaze brokered no other option. Failure was not optional. "It's up to you now, cousin." With a nod, the 3 shinobi body flickered away just as Mito drew her own blade and purposely strode to the gates of her clan shrine, her sword maiden trailing in her wake. They had done all they could to preserve the clan. It was time to end this kabuki drama between villages. Ibaya. I. Ginkgo Tego Toru knelt in the wet grass for the 5th day in a row with loathing, his eyes taking in the widespread destruction from his cliff's concealed vantage point. Today's sky was angry, with dark and roiling clouds masking the sun's warmth, while below him man grunted, fought, bled, and died in the misery of war. He clutched his cloak about his shoulders as the wind whipped up around him, a fitting companion to the death and waste happening below. His accompanying sniff was filled to the brim with disdain. They disgusted him in every sense. Pitifully short-lived, man had made a thorough mess of every endeavor, mucking up the very land with their blind morass of stumbling greed. How had the 13 allowed this manifestation to grow like the cancer it was? His ears perked nervously. Had he said that aloud or merely thought it? Girding himself tighter in the howling morning wind, he mentally reprimanded his lapse in discipline. To ease his mind, he idly fussed with the same fleck of mud beleaguering his cloak. This will never come out. Ruined. His mercurial mind flickered back to his last thought. Where was I? Oh, yes. That way led to pain at the hands of the Justicars, and his silver eyes flicked nervously to the nearest brush. Being one of the few clan males did not grant him immunity. His mouth twitched into a familiar sneer even before the first few drops fell from the sky. Perfect, he groused silently and tugged his hood down to further shield his face. He had no idea why the matron was interested in these blustering infants, this walking blight upon the land, but she ordered, thus he obeyed. For 3 turns of the cycle he obeyed. He would die obeying with none to mourn him. That was not their way. He knew one goal and only one. He needed to find her. Wherever she lay, whatever den or village or mudhole had hidden the great Yuko, he needs must find her. His body shifted as he noted the significant rise in power below, the thrumming vibration that shook the mountains and the bones deep in his chest before all went still. It was an ominous end and somewhat anticlimactic, yet it pulled at him, his body leaning forward of its own accord. It was then that he noticed them. 3 streaks fled northward toward his direction, one pausing to slam a hand down to the earth before summoning the largest frog. No, toad judging by the warty skin, he'd ever seen. He reflexively sniffed again. The thing must have stood 40 spans high, the blue vest and blade at his side at odds with the pipe clamped in its warty lips. Unfortunately, he had little time to stand there slack-jawed as the beast gave one powerful flex of its hind quarters and cleared the distance between the island and shore of the mainland, another hop sending it high into the air and cleanly over the very cliff Toru observed from. For the briefest of moments, his eyes locked with those of the 3 humans atop the creature's head before they were gone, the toad thumping his way with each earth-shattering leap deeper into the heart of fire country. Toru was no fool. He knew exactly what lay deeper into the land of flames, but his mind wandered to what might lay in that ornate box tucked firmly under the rather thick arm of the male with spiky white hair. The delicious delay only lasted a few moments more before his eyes were unavoidably drawn back to the tiny island under siege. Cretans. Neanderthals, all of them. Its tragic end was a foregone conclusion. He knew the outcome even as he turned back to it and settled back into a comfortable crouch. He would need to see its finale before returning to his clan's matron and dare not leave a moment beforehand. He could not help but be distracted though as his mind kept wandering back to the deliciously curious secrets hidden away in that secret treasure box. Even before the battle ended he knew where his next journey would take him. Inside he shuddered contemplating a life among these beasts. Who would ever want to live a human's life? He simply could not fathom it. Perhaps he should delay for the necessary diligence in investigating that other island group further east, just in case the remnants held more of the Uzumaki below. He sighed in anticipation of more agonizing moments attempting to keep the smelly creatures at arm's length as he hunted and pecked through the humanity of yet another mud-hole village. A servant's work was never done. With another look of disgust, his fingers picked at the persistent blotch upon his cloak. If only he had fresh lemons he could. Aye. When all was said and done, Onoki stormed from the island 3 days later empty-handed and, once his remaining troops had been recovered, began the long trek home without delay. Cries of the victorious force rang half-hearted in his ears and left a bitter taste in his mouth. Their shinobi might have ultimately shattered the Uzumaki phalanx but at the cost of much blood, sweat and tears, their victory hollow and turning to ashes in their mouths with their morale equally broken. Weeks of non-stop effort and they hadn't even been able to breach the final dome protecting the shrine, a shrine rumored to hold the greatest treasures of the clan. It was all for nothing and he wanted to be fully done with the place. He left convinced the price was too high to pay for this win. Let the others fight over the scraps. Years 6 months after the fall of Uzushiogakure. Oi. Stop breaking down the damned door. Jiraiya, the mighty toad sage, was not feeling very mighty at the moment. As he groaned his way up to a sitting position, head thumping all the way, one hand blindly reached out to grab and shake what he discovered to be an empty sake bottle. Damn it all to hell and back. Someone wants their skull caved in for this. It was still dark in his hotel room but the sleeping bodies lying next to him wouldn't have budged if the sodden hotel were ablaze. Everything from the neck up still hurt from last night's information gathering session but, if the shapely leg draped across his own was any indication, it was a highly successful endeavor. He cast a quick glance under the covers of the barely covered bottom on the other side and grinned at his own superiority. Mortal men quake in my presence, and, thinking it a clever little jibe, began looking for his trusty pad and pencil seeing a brilliant introduction in his near future. Then the impatient bastard trying to break down his hotel room doors started trying to raise the dead again. To make matters worse, the heavy fog trying to squeeze his brain was winning and the white-haired legend was considering ripping off a limb or two to make the fool ruining his lay-in vanish into the Suna desert. He needed to finish up negotiations with that bastard Rasa today before shooting off to spy on Kumo. Oh, the beauties they have there, A weary hand gripped the bridge of his nose as he considered the ramifications of Kumo or Iwa, as neither by themselves could do much after the Third Shinobi War, managed to drink enough booze to work out an agreement threatening Konoha's safety. That thought almost made the carpet lining his tongue palatable. A quick wince, a muttered prayer to whatever wine gods favored him for the day, and a grumbled wiggle out from under the exhausted tangle of flesh, and he was off at a stumbling shuffle. Flinging the door open with an irate, "What?" caused the knuckles barreling towards the formerly closed door to freeze in place and hover. Or, maybe it was the fact that he was bare-assed and the confused kunoichi bearing his village's crest on her forehead was turning a brilliant shade of red while imitating a lionfish. Normally such a reaction would have been priceless, but he was far from impressed. He thought the rules spelled out clearly at the beginning of this mission, even for his village's ambassador to Uzushiogakure, had been pretty explicit. Despite how comfortable I am in my skin, this had better be important. We talked about this, Jiraiya began in the exhausted voice he often used to berate detractors of his literary genius. He jerked to a fuzzy-brained halt once she slapped a scroll against his chest and bolted for the end of the hallway without a word. HNH, nice speed on that one, he gruffed out with a chuckle before closing the door to the outside world. That was better than arguing. Maybe he should use that tactic more often. Who knows, maybe he'll get lucky from time to time. With a light giggle, despite his pounding head, he staggered back to his crowded bed. Oh well, another 3 or 4 hours should hit the spot. Without thinking, he tossed the unopened scroll onto his pile of things in the sitting area and trudged back to his warm bed and the 2 unconscious piles of curves awaiting his return. He'd get dressed later and revisit the "do not disturb before noon" policy with twitchy ambassador once more. Career bureaucrat, HMPH. If he was feeling particularly generous, and he was after last night's escapades, he might treat her to round or two to smooth over the hurt from her encounter with the great Jiraiya. He chuckled again even as he crawled across the bed to face plant between the twins, his eyes growing heavy as they slid shut with a sigh. Too bad the third sister couldn't get off shift, otherwise triplets would have been awesome. What? It wasn't like Konoha was burning or anything. There wasn't anything that blonde bastard of a student he loved like a son couldn't handle, the cheater. I. Meanwhile, back in Hai no Kuni. Year 11 day 283. Unlike so many days before I began this pilgrimage, today is a day worthy of note. As such, I shall endeavor to strike prose to passage as I document what precedes me. A few hours from the hidden village of Konohagakure no Sato I came across signs of her passage. All about me lay strewn the whirlwind of her rage, the earth at my feet embracing the great Yuko's paw not more than 100 yards from some nameless haven of humanity. As I look about me, straw and wood hovels lay smashed to so much kindling, the dead, bleeding, and wailing stagger about equally dazed or cling to a loved one now past. Having little to no success in my travels, I am set to return to this village hidden amongst the leaves in search of a young maiden of crimson locks spied those short days after Uzushio fell. The few after images of her likeness found cast throughout the other lands held neither her spark nor furor, and, to this revelation, I must again cling in the hopes that her bond with the Nine has deepened enough that I may perceive it. The great roars in the distance have ceased, and it is with heavy heart that I hope my haste of these past 11 years have not dimmed my successful culmination of matron's ambition. Praise be to Inari that I may be fortuitous at last. Toru, the silver ghost. I. 4 years later in the great tree itself. Like tinkling bells and silver wind chimes, the tiny child's laughter rang out in the late rainy morning. Her bare feet skipped along the cobblestones kicking up water from errant puddles. The rosy hue of her yukata sleeves flapped like soggy wings, the many imprinted butterflies and snapdragon flowers delicately embroidered on the delicate silk flickering with every twirl and hop. Golden thread sparkled just enough when the clouds parted to catch the eye. Her laughter trilled as her face scrunched up to the heavens, eyes closed in a squint as she blew raspberries to the angry clouds above. Her single bun had disintegrated through rough and tumble play, her honeyed skin covered in fresh rain and auburn hair plastered to her face through the morning showers. Raising her tiny hands to the sky as if she could grab the clouds and wring them dry, the child spun in a circle calling for her brother to come and play. Hearing no response, her laughter died as she stopped her dizzying spin, her flailing hair partially blocking her eyes. "Ni-san." The girl spun quickly to look behind her, her eyes wide open, their crimson color fading to gold the closer you got to her oval-shaped irises. Her cherubic face broke out into a particularly feral grin, long canines piercing her lower lip causing blood to dribble down her chin, her voice dropping 4 octaves. "Come play with me, Ni-san." Then the world erupted into flame. I. At that exact moment, House of Hope Orphanage, Kanahagakure no Sato. Somewhere in Konoha, a small child cried out in fear, his nightmare shocking him awake in the dank and dismal room filled with the smell of his own sweat and bodily wastes. Amethyst blue eyes tried to pierce the darkness of his windowless cell while his frantic gasps tried to calm his furiously beating heart. There were noises outside his room, footsteps followed by angry voices stopping just outside the door, one of them familiar, the orphanage matron. He could hear keys jingling and then the lock started to make familiar clicking noises. All too familiar. Panic set in and the small boy scrabbled along the wall furthest from the door, sounds frantically trying to make himself as small and unthreatening as he could in the darkest corner he could find. It wasn't a difficult thing to do in a pitch-black room barely bigger than a closet. Something threw the door open, nearly ripping it from its frame, and the flood of light nearly blinded him. His eyes always hurt with any light, even when he wasn't kept in this room for, how many days had it been now? He could vaguely hear the matron pleading with someone, something about needing to discipline the beast. The child knew she was referring to him because she never called anyone else that bad word, not even the Koga brothers, and they bullied everyone. With a whimper, as he knew crying out would only get him beaten again, the boy curled up in a ball with his face as far into the corner crevice as he could push it, his arms flailing about trying to cover as many areas of his body and head as possible, the growing silence from the blurry figures by the door growing louder with each passing second. Everything was suddenly so loud right before the silence became deafening. He must have called out in his bad dream and they gotta really be angry now. To be honest, it didn't matter if he did or didn't cry out. They always blamed him, and they always beat him for it. He hated that spoon. The quiet grew almost too much to bear and his heart was beating so hard it was echoing off the walls and thundering in his ears. He couldn't see movement with his face pressed into the small corner, but he could feel the heat from the person that had to be standing right behind him, their breath hot on the back of his neck. That chilling fear that started as panic was now full-fledged terror. He bit his lip to keep from crying out and reflexively jerked as his arms became desperate, trying to ward off the blows he just knew were coming soon. They always came, but why were they taking so long this time? They were so close now. When gloved hands grabbed his arms, the shock became too much, and, with a final shriek of terror, he passed out. Standing in the mangled doorway, Hiruzen observed everything that transpired and was incensed. Anger and killing intent began to freely flow, causing the rotund matron standing behind him to cower on the other side of the hallway. At some point, she lost control of her bladder and sank to the floor, babbling incoherently as the very air closed in on her. Somewhere in the back of her petrified brain, images of her own gruesome death began to flash before her eyes. With a carefully restrained flick of his wrist, he sent Neko off to the hospital to get the boy looked at by a trusted friend. That done, he slowly turned to face Matron Nagara, the glare in his eyes promising long-lasting pain, until her growing dread turned her into a blubbering, whimpering mess. Find a replacement for the good mother until Ibiki is finished with their upcoming conversation. 2 swooshes of shadowy air and the Hokage was alone in the hallway while his anger cooled, the stench of the now empty larder wafting out into the hallway as his only company. He conveniently forgot to tell the pleading orphanage manager that her conversation with Ibiki would be the last conversation she would ever have. At the same time that the House of Hope was undergoing a managerial shift, a hooded and heavily cloaked figure slipped from the shadows of an alley, his nondescript hood pulled low enough to shadow any recognizable features. Tall and lean of build, the gait was smooth and gender-neutral, no swaying or swaggering to betray form or function of the so inclined. The gait maintained an even tempo and ate up ground as the figure shuffled, dipped left through one alley, scaled a wall like a wraith before leaping back 2 rooftops to emerge from another alley headed in a completely random direction. A half hour of this peculiar behavior and the figure paused by a nondescript door. Above it lay a wooden sign depicting a single kunai blade, the bland colors on it weathered and faded through years of rain and relentless sun. Standing there in the stoop, the figure waited in the flickering light of the doorway as if waiting for something or someone. Some unknown catalyst occurred, and the hooded phantom turned to enter the dilapidated establishment, nodding once to the barkeep before making an abrupt right just past the entry door and passing through another portal just past the restrooms. It ignored the semi-conscious shinobi spattered about the drinking room and smirked at the jaunty, a hard day's night, playing from the ancient jukebox. Show tunes among shinobi. Who knew? Once the employees only door closed behind it, the figure lifted a glowing hand to backlight the short hallway leading to another door not more than a half-dozen meters away. Closing one gloved fist and extinguishing the jutsu, the figure lifted another to the aged wood. Knock, 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 knock. The door opened silently on well-oiled hinges. Inside the room sat a circular table with 4 chairs, 2 of which had their potential occupants standing behind them. On the table sat a nondescript white bottle and 4 saucers, each one turned upside down in front of an empty seat. The hooded figure entered and stood directly behind one of the chairs. After the soft click from the closing door echoed in the silent chamber, the masked and equally nondescript door opener moved to stand behind the only remaining seat. The tension rose briefly as the 4 figures cautiously observed each other, the only light in the room centered over the small table and chair set. The sparse bulb was barely enough to show no sandaled feet lurking in the far corners. As one, 4 gloved pairs of hands reached up slowly enough to pull back their hoods showing 4 Anbu-style masks. The monkey looked across to the newly joined dragon and nodded. Tiger and Rooster nodded once he glanced their way. Again, and as one, all 4 raised their hands in the same foreign sign, the right fist closed and held chest high with the left palm opened in a knife-like fashion, the flat palm resting against the knuckles of the right fist. As one they lowered their hands and the tension lessened minutely. I hope there is a good reason for calling us here off schedule, Tiger intoned, his voice almost growling in displeasure. They are moving up the timetable. Subject is being extracted as we speak. Dragon was neither anxious nor annoyed. He just was. What of our plans? Nothing has changed for us, Rooster. If not for their masks they would have been identical. That was the point of the identical henge after all, anonymity. Do we know yet? Monkey seemed nervous. Not yet. We have narrowed it to a dozen primary. Anything less will take more time, years maybe. If nothing has changed for us then why call us here? Tiger didn't move their feet but there was a hitch in their shoulders, almost like a settling of their balance. We must adjust the plan for our subject's new environment. The other 3 tensed simultaneously. Which one? Was all that Rooster said. Echo. At this Tiger did take a step back. And you are absolutely sure of this? Dragon nodded only once in return. I wish that I were not. He glanced around at his 3 mystery guests. We must be flawless in our execution. How is the subject? 3 masks turned to Rooster, but Monkey answered. The subject is faring as well as can be expected. Today they made contact with the rabbit. An impression was made. His head tilted slightly as if remembering something. Favorable. Monkey nodded. Very. Tiger chuckled in response. Rooster reached out and popped the cork on the bottle with a kunai, the sealing tag breaking as he flipped over his cup and poured a drink of the clear liquid. The other 3 flipped over their own saucers and repeated the process. As one, 4 cups held before their faces in one hand with the other placed in front of the saucer in a similar flat-palmed gesture, the four of them drained the vessels and placed them upside down on the table. None of them removed their masks before drinking. Nothing else needed to be said before four shadows vanished simultaneously from the room. Somewhere in Konoha, 6 years after Kyuubi, a.k. Stumbling, falling to his hands and knees, his palms scraped raw and bloody as he scrambled shakily to his feet yet again, the small figure tore through the back alleys in terror. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears, drowning out the ragged sound of his breathing. This was becoming an all too familiar sensation the past few months, one that he hated. It was like this last year also. Festivals were supposed to be good things, but Konoha's only festival of the year always made things difficult. People seemed to get really angry before this one came around. It was something the now frantic 6-year-old did not understand. His throat raw despite the cool night air. His voice had all but failed him during the last half hour while he tripped over garbage cans, dodged angry mobs by ducking under abandoned carts, and cowered in the shadows to the sound of angry and drunken voices. This by far was the most terrifying half hour of his miserable 6-year-old existence. In a flash of golden hair dirty from grime and caked with blood, he scrambled into a darkened corner and tried very hard not to move or make a sound, each breath coming out as a strained hiss through clenched teeth. Wait here, Kit. There she was again, his angel. She'd never lied to him before, so he hunkered down and waited. I lost him. The small child flinched. More angry words and swearing followed. He didn't recognize that voice, angry and frantic as it was, but the sound sparked a fresh round of terror, causing the frightened child to instinctively press down and away from the light of the streets, sheer panic pressing down on every square inch of his body, forcing him further into the grimy corner of the alley he was hiding in. He waited just like his angel asked him to. It felt like forever for the adrenaline-fueled fugitive, the moments ticking away in reverse as angry feet splashed through freezing puddles and slammed into the hard stone. A small, raspy whine slipped through his clenched teeth before he could silence it with tiny hands pressed to his mouth. A pitiful sound crossed between a soul-shattering sob and whispered plea for help, any kind of help. Tiny fingers clamped down frantically, crushing the whimper into a hiss of leaky air. He needed to be still, but it was so hard. Maybe if they couldn't find him they would give up. Maybe they would go back to their drinking and leave him be. Several pairs of legs landed on the ground not more than 3 meters from where he crouched. Snabby! His young mind screamed. Their backs were to him and he couldn't see higher than their waist, but he could tell that their upper bodies were being twisted side to side. They were searching for the small beast that got away. They were looking for him. People were talking to each other in hushed and angry tones, but he couldn't hear a word of it. All he could hear was his own heart screaming in his tiny ears. Thump thump. How come they couldn't hear it? The pounding made his neck hurt. Thump thump. Couldn't they feel the terror coming off him in waves? Thump thump. Without warning, the legs ran off in the direction of other voices. Someone thought they found the beast and the hunt was back on again with a chorus of howls and jeers. After a few more shudders wreaked havoc on his small frame, Naruto Uzumaki released through clenched teeth the shaky breath he'd been holding, then edged his way out of the shadows and away from the angry legs that called for his blood. Go quickly, Kit. We need to get back to our den. He was still hungry, he just no longer cared. If he could get home, then he could look for food tomorrow. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow, he chanted it mentally like a lucky charm. Tuki, Jason would help him tomorrow. Tuki, Jason never yelled or threw things at him. Tuki, Jason always helped. The first few steps were hesitant and wobbly. A leg gave out in fear, causing him to stumble and fall to the ground, splashing muddy water all over himself and scraping away more skin in angry little patches. His head whipped around in terror as he froze. Did anyone hear him? Hurry, Kit. He lurched to his feet and pushed onto the end of the alley, staying to the darker side. He could see the end now. There were fewer lights in the streets here, fewer people. His heart was racing again, but this time in hope. He was very close now. So very close. It was because he was so close that his face scrunched up into confusion and anger when his legs abandoned him again less than 10 meters from the edge of the alley entrance and the ground rushed up to meet him with a dull thud. He was vaguely aware of a sharp pain in his back below his right shoulder blade. The alley entryway spun as he fell, the street twisting in his vision so that he seemed to turn sideways, his head bouncing off the hard, stone ground. It was also getting harder to breathe, almost like he was breathing through water. Funny that. I wonder why. He thought. Oh, it must have something to do with this big guy behind me and the shiny, sharp thing in his hand. It looks bloody too. He was no stranger to blood. He'd seen enough of his own over the past 2 years. The small child wanted to figure out why he couldn't run anymore, but his attention flickered briefly over the shoulder of the sneering snobby standing over him to the 2 cloaked figures on the roof. They were wearing masks and he briefly wondered where he could get one like theirs. Did they find them at the festival? Maybe he could wear it to hide behind if he ran out of food next year. Maybe he could go to the festival like everyone else if he had a cloak and mask. His mind flickered back to the present when one of the 2 on the roof moved. Why did it look like the smaller one was reaching out to him? One of the masked people was angry and pushed the smaller one. There was a flash, some awesome smoke, and then they were gone. He couldn't think about it any longer since the angry guy standing over him was yelling and waving to someone just off where he couldn't see. It didn't matter anyway because Naruto couldn't understand what he was saying. He sounded very happy all of a sudden and had a brief thought that it was good that this person could be happy during a festival that seemed to make everyone else so sad. This thought popped into the small boy's mind just before his whole world erupted into pain. After an eternity of agony, a heavy sandal stomped on the back of his head and everything went completely black. He wondered no more, and his angel's voice seemed really, really far away. I. Ryan followed behind the Hokage, her lion-faced mask hiding the apprehension written clearly across their very human-looking face. The old man was standing atop the Hokage tower watching Nin streak across the night sky in search of the vessel. Ryan felt they should have been out there with the others. Call this punishment for a job done all too well. The lion-faced Anbu didn't even appreciate the deprecating humor of their mask. She'd never displayed demonstrable aggression, among the humans anyway, in the combative arts, excelling instead in the administrative field. Her crude peerage found some humor in the mask jibe, so she sniffed, often, and let this to pass without so much as an acknowledgement. Her disdainful attitude fit right in with the perky altar image. Absent-mindedly her left hand reached up and adjusted the uncompromising wrappings around the smaller-than-average chest, trying to get at the itch just beneath them. How human women suffered through the indignity was beyond her. She was thankful enough that she'd opted for a less robust figure for this new alter ego. A spy's life was difficult enough as it was. Thank Inari Kami for small favors. Back to the old man standing above her with an orb in his hand, Hokage was peering very deeply into it. Every so often he'd tap the tiny communicator hidden in his right ear and provided directions, most likely to Inu, as others closed in on his location. Was it enough? It had to be enough. Please be fast enough. Ryan really did not wish to explain to the matron how she let Kyuubi Haim die at the hand of savages. That was a conversation that could only end one way, and she'd be a thrice cursed Inuzuka if it ended well in any way, shape, or fashion. Ryan. She snapped to attention, one fist to the roof next to a slender right knee. Hi, Hokage-sama. The lilting alto voice sounded oddly pleasant even through the mask. I have found him. Secure the boy until Inu arrives. Hurry. Pale blue eyes looked through slitted eyeholes and up into the glowing orb held low enough to peer into, enabling her recognition of the alley junction as well as the shinobi stalking the boy from behind. The lion-faced Anbu leapt away so fast the Hokage thought it was a body flicker jutsu. She had to be fast enough. Inari Kami let her be fast enough today. I. Something shook him, and the shock made his eyes fly open. Pain. Pain was all. Pain was breath, life, light. What was this feeling? Flying. No, floating. He couldn't understand why it was still dark with his eyes open. It didn't matter. They hurt so much it was easier to keep them closed. Why was it so cold? Oh, that's right. It was October, and October weather is always cool. He had a birthday in October, didn't he? Someone, please make the bees quiet down. They sounded angry and the buzzing was starting to hurt his head. How did the bees know his name? Couldn't they tell he was tired? Sue, tired. Maybe if he closed his eyes for a little while, just for a lit. Apparently, the bees didn't like that. They wanted him to keep his eyes open, but the flashes of light made it hard. His eyes were heavy, so very heavy, especially the right one. Were those bells he heard? Also, who would be giggling this late at night? Don't they realize people are trying to sleep? Ground-ups got angry when people woke them up. He wanted to sleep too. He wanted to sleep so very much. Ni-chan. A cerulean blue orb shot open only to stare blankly into the cold mask of an Ansatsu Senjutsu Tokushubutai, Anbu, agent streaking through the night. Hey, this Anbu had whiskers just like Naruto. That was kind of neat. I. The dog-faced Anbu cursed softly. He was trying not to jostle the broken and bloody child cradled in his arms, but that loose roof tile caught him by surprise and the child twitched from the pain. His Anbu-issued cloak was ruined, blood flowing from numerous stab wounds in the child's body, far more blood flowing than could possibly be in one this tiny. He had no doubt that the child had few bones still intact. He could count the child's ribs even before the mob smashed them into odd angles. This little one did not have long left. Oh, how he wished he could kill them all. Vessel or not, no person deserved this. That it had been done to an innocent child made it all the more reprehensible. It's a good thing the demon inside him clearly wanted to live because it was going to earn its keep tonight. Rat and Mouse had some explaining to do, but first, he needed to see to the child. Cammy take pity on the resident doctor or nurse that refused to help the child, for he would not. It was a good thing that he was met at the entrance by a worry-faced doctor with a full team. Thank Cammy that the Hokage had connections and knew good people. Year 17, day 283. As I sit dumbfounded by the day's events, my hands clench and unclench of their own accord. Despite drowning them in sterile alcohol and scalding water, I can still see the stains. How has circumstance led to this? My failure is now complete, yet I cannot form the words to condemn my soul to my beloved matron. How can humans be so ignorant, so cowardly, so cruel? Chance thus fortuned that I should soar near the heavens, my own wax wings singed in the glory of my triumph. Blindly I searched for the Crimson Princess only to allow the crowned prince to slip through my clutches like fine wine before pagans. The vessel lays dying even as my tears stain this, the transcript of my inadequacy. May Cammy have mercy on my soul, for she will not. It is fortunate that a feminine face stares back at me, for I could not bear to gaze on my own. Now my tears no longer seem so out of place. Toru, the silver ghost. Wherever he was it was dark, and the ground was wet. No, it was covered in water deep enough to hide his hands. He was thirsty, but the water kept turning red. Everywhere he went the water turned red. Eventually, he just stopped trying to get a drink and instead tried to figure out why his right eye wouldn't work. He was a smart boy for his age. He knew his right from his left. He didn't know what that thumping sound was, but it was everywhere around him, and it was loud, slow, but loud. Lifting his head up from where he was down on both hands and knees in the growing pool of red water, he could see dingy walls with large pipes on either side of a long hallway. It almost looked like the sewers he used sometimes to hide in from the angry people, only it didn't smell as bad. The water at least didn't smell as bad. Truth was that sewers sucked no matter where you were, but here the water was kind of salty. He looked up again. The pipes to his left briefly glowed with a nice blue light every time that thumping sound came. The pipes on the right glowed an orangey red color, and both sets glowed together. The red pipe seemed to be a lot brighter right now. It was almost comforting. Since he didn't know where he was and still needed help, he rose tiredly to his feet to begin staggering along the dark hallway, or at least he tried to. He was having a really hard time standing up at the moment. He figured he'd just follow the pipes, not caring that there were torches lighting up as he moved along the tunnel. It just helped him to see better with his one good eye. The right one didn't seem to work right now. He could hear the tinkling of a small bell off in the darkness. It sounded familiar. He lost track of the number of times he fell. Everything hurt bad and it was hard to breathe. He thought it odd that his hands didn't want to work right and his legs kept falling out from underneath him. Eventually, he just pulled himself along and half-crawled along the tunnel. He stopped moving only when his head hit something hard and metal. Oh, my. They hurt you pretty badly. For several moments, the boy just lay there in the water not moving, his forehead pressed against the cool metal. The bells tinkled again as someone approached him on the other side of whatever metal thing he bumped his head on. Then he slowly looked up and blinked his one good eye to clear out the blood. In front of his face was a thick block of metal with lots of writing in it. The writing and pictures were very thin and covered every square inch, but, since he couldn't read, it was just pretty to look at. When he tried to look up, he couldn't see the end of the bar, but this wasn't the only block of metal. There were many others on either side of this one. It sort of looked like the metal gate at the front of the Hyuga mansion, only the bars were thicker and golden brown in color. There was a sharp gasp of air just past the bars, so that brought his attention from the very large gate to the pretty face peeking at him through the gap in the fence. In his days of pain, he found her very pretty and he felt bad that she had to see him the way he was. Her mouth was open with a sleeve of her yukata covering the lower half of her face, the silken cloth a mix between a soft pink and a very light purple color. The butterflies on the fabric were golden like the coins in the greedy merchant's shop with all the jewels. She lowered her sleeve to speak again and he could see a collar around her neck made in black material. He didn't know it was silk, covered in silver symbols with a shiny golden bell just below her chin. Her eyes were wide in fear and sadness, a single tear sliding down the side of her face. You look very hurt. I can help you if you like. Her eyes flicked to the trail of blood slowly spreading out into the water covering the floor and away from his broken body. Her golden red eyes with the black slits held tears that started racing down her pretty cheeks. Her skin was the color of honey and looked very soft. She reached out with one sleeved hand and he instinctively flinched, leaning away and to the side. His reaction made her cringe, her sad face scrunching up as more tears welled up into her very large eyes. He thought she had very pretty eyes. No, I won't hurt you. We are one and the same. Naruto had never had anyone say that to him before. Heck, he didn't have the first clue what that even meant, but it sounded nice. She sounded nice. Except for 3 people in his short life, no one cared, as far as he knew, whether he lived, ate, or breathed. Trust, as a result, did not come easy for the orphan, but he could tell he was dying. His normally hot running body was starting to get very cold. The room was getting darker, he was getting weaker, and he was wet and miserable. What else did he have to lose at this point? It's not like he could outrun her if she could squeeze through the bars. Slowly, very slowly, his body righted itself and, as his tired eyes started to close, he leaned forward enough to touch his forehead to her tiny hand hovering between the gate. The little girl's response was a shuddering sigh that turned into a happy giggle. With his remaining eye closed, Naruto could not see the red chakra oozing from her sleeve as it coated his body. He could not see the many pulsing symbols along the walls and bars of this girl's cage surge to life. He could neither see nor feel his body rising from the water nor feel her soft hand caressing his cheek as her chakra deadened his receptors. He couldn't even feel the tender kiss she gave him through the bars nor hear her soft words as she began to shut down various senses and unnecessary functions prior to starting the repairs to his wrecked body. She spoke to him nonetheless. Humans think they know, but they are unseeing, unknowing children scrabbling about in the darkness. He could not see the statue rising from one corner of the room on her side of the bars, the figure on the pedestal looking very much like a certain blonde-haired Jinchuriki with thick manacles wrapped around its neck, waist, and wrists which were further shackled together like a prisoner. They cannot see the light of their salvation and have spurned what is good and just, and they call me monster. On the walls of her cage, larger seals began to appear in rows with smaller seals near the bottom, and within her short reach, while more and more seals appeared above each row, growing in complexity. If we cannot make them see the truth, then we will thrive without them and make them choke on their foolishness and fear. She reached up to one of the seals, placing the flat of her palm across the center of it. There was a burst of blue-white flame that engulfed her hand, and the seal flared violently for a second before its crimson color flashed to a dull and burnt black. Only once it was completely charred did she lower her hand and look to the boy floating in a cocoon of her chakra. This will help for now, but soon they will see. They will all see. She went back to the bars and reached out to the unconscious boy with concern etched across her entire face. I promised when that one-eyed bastard lost his control over me that I would help you. I promised that I would make good on the pain I've caused you, to your family. She lifted her hand and the boy's body rotated so that he hung upright and freely in the air. I cannot embrace you as I would like. Not yet anyway, but I can help you now that we are properly linked. Several circles 3 feet in diameter appeared on the wall beneath the seals in her cage, each with an oval pupil slashing vertically from top to bottom. She placed her palm in the middle of one and her chakra once again flared to life as flames flowed from the center slit to the outer rim like fire chasing oil, the tendrils connecting to complete the eye's form. When the flames died, she lowered her hand and was rewarded with a colorless circle minus the eye slit. She grunted in disappointment. This will never do. She pushed another tendril of chakra through the dark sphere and an image appeared as if a human eye flickered open. She could see into a sterile hospital room while a nurse puttered around changing out bandage supplies. The sound of paper rustling and medical tools clanking on a sterile table transmitted nicely through the circle. Otherwise, the room was empty. Seeing no need to observe the poor creature any longer, she broke the connection with a wave of her hand and turned back to her floating model. Her smile seemed ravenous at this point. Well, that worked nicely. I. Nurse Tomoko froze when a chill shot down her spine. She didn't know why, but she was compelled to turn around, her heart racing in her own ears to see nothing. There were no windows in the room, the only light coming from the bright overheads. A bed, a nightstand, and the beeping monitor were the only man-made items in the room. With a quick check in the private bathroom, she turned to check over the lone occupant one last time. The child was breathing steadily, his one visible eye closed and the other wrapped heavily in bandages. It was silly to assume that the child would be conscious given the Herculean effort needed to save his life. They'd only moved him from ICU to here just that morning. It was silly to even consider, right? He was just a boy after all. With a soft grunt at her own paranoia, she clicked off the lights and left the room for her break. The young Anbu captain appeared on the roof adjacent to the dried pool of blood in the alleyway below. He was 20 feet above the ground and it still appeared far too large to have come from that tiny body. Below he could see the shinobi police force, their trademark blue jackets with the red and white paddle emblazoned on the back, scurrying around the crime scene pretending to be interested in police procedure. Inu was not fooled. Half of them were standing dead center in the bloody earth, diligently eradicating any valuable evidence left in the crime scene. The somber dog-faced Nin, TSKED, audibly in disgust. Without turning away from the disgusting display of bias, he pulled the string hovering in his shadow. Report. 2 Anbu, one with purple hair braided to the small of her back and a cat's mask and the other with spiky brown hair and boar tusks, stepped forward. The cat spoke first in lilting feminine tones, her edged voice crisp with her frustration, like a blade being drawn from the scabbard. Apparently, the child hunkered down in preparation for the festival. His apartment showed signs of being barricaded from the inside, at least to the best abilities of a small child. A 6-year-old could not have anticipated two drunken shinobi breaking into his apartment 3 days prior to and trashing the place, nor the unidentified intruders that broke in tonight and flushed him out a second time. An open window in his bedroom suggests he escaped through there. The suspects destroyed what little food he could gather. Did you know he is charged 4 to 5 times the going rate for rotten food and boxed ramen? Her disgust and annoyance were evident, but she was not expecting a response. Her eyes swung down to the crowd below them long enough to scowl at everyone, making a mockery of efficient investigative work while she continued her verbal. They opened all of his ramen containers and urinated in the cups. The rest of his meager belongings were strewn about his apartment or broken beyond salvage. To make matters worse, none of the vendors would sell him more food for the week, citing, she paused to review her notes, limited supply due to festival sales. With the trap set, we estimate the child went the last 2 to 3 days before the festival holed up in his dump of an apartment without anything to eat. These bastards knew he would eventually have to sneak out to find something to eat, and they stalked him from his apartment to the market, then set upon him almost immediately. Neko was known for her dispassionate, almost methodical analysis, but here she sounded furious. Inu could swear he heard her growl. Were domestic cats capable of that? No assumptions or conjecture here, Neko-chan. You are sure they stalked him? The feline Anbu held up a glossy bag sealed and labeled, Exhibit Number 5, its glossy environs containing several expired cigarette butts. These were collected on one of the neighboring rooftops adjacent to the victim's apartment complex, which is convenient since his apartment building and the ones surrounding it are all empty and have been since he moved in a year ago. Additionally, we found standard issue protein bars and meal supplements, several of the partially consumed pieces with trace DNA. Samples were sent for analysis to T&I, Intelligence Forensic Subdivision, for confirmation and a match to our suspects. Now that sounded like the Neko he knew. All three figures shuddered briefly. Despite being hardened shinobi, all of them were intimately familiar with Konoha's torture and interrogation division. In fact, Inu would be headed there once he wrapped up his findings on site. Anything else? Bor took over from there. As you can see, the Uchiha and civilian police force are diligently deleting any usable evidence we could use to corroborate eyewitness accounts, not that Konoha's honorable populace would have offered any. The group frowned, almost in sync at the obvious bias against the container. We managed to secure about half of the images we needed for our database before the circus arrived and began impeding our efforts. His ensuing snort was filled with derision. Even managed to get an L square on a couple of them. The dog Nin clucked his teeth loudly while glancing down into the alley as Bor rattled off the rest. An L square was a measuring tool, a ruler with a 90-degree bend for measuring prints and other objects. Ibiki once called it by its old name, some kind of visual scale if memory served. It was old technology resurrected from a time predating the warring clans era, but it had its uses. Not a silver shuriken by any stretch of the imagination, but it could help build a web of evidence to catch a shoddy criminal. His lone eye hovered over the one civilian suspect below and narrowed. Too bad most shinobi were trained to get around such tactics. There were 5 people primarily involved in the attack, with over a dozen observers/supporters cheering them on at the time. Amazing how there were no corroborating eyewitness testimonies from any of them to provide a coherent picture of what actually happened. That last part was spoken almost to himself, but both Inu and Neko caught the dripping sarcasm all the same. They all contradict what viable evidence left at the scene suggests, and all of them claim the child attacked the mob single-handedly while unarmed. Some claim he spouted several heads and large demonic wings with clawed hands at the wingtips. Others say he grew enormous fangs and tried to drink their blood. Is there any proof to substantiate their counterclaim? The elite asked despite the unbelieving tone of his voice. He needed to follow protocol just in case. There were no wounds on any of the victims, unless you count mud as a lethal weapon. Some of the child's injuries suggest he was defensive for the first part of it, but our guy found no shreds of skin beneath his fingernails to indicate he'd tried to fight off his attackers, no torn cloth in his hands or mouth. There was no need to elaborate on who their guy was. Anbu had a specialist trained to work in time-delicate situations where a victim's life was on the line and evidentiary perishability was an issue. Inu snarled in disgust. Send the liars to Ibiki. Fill his cells. Bor nodded, glad that his mask hid the wince in his eyes. Therein lies the first major problem. Primary suspects include 1 civilian and 4 shinobi with significant clan ties. We have a Yamanaka, a Inazuka, a Hyuga and a Uchiha, all lesser clan members without heir status, but clan members nonetheless. Inu whistled sharply while looking down again at the 5 figures kneeling in the dirty alley with their hands in restraints. Was that police officer congratulating them on a job well done? He knew the pain all of this would cause his investigation. Then an odd thought struck him as he looked at the sun peeking over the horizon. Why haven't they been taken to Ibiki yet? Bor merely pointed to the platoon of clan lawyers arguing sharply with the lead security force representative, the fools' placating gestures doing little to ease their concerns. Inu fought the urge to urinate over the roof ledge and onto the disgusting cesspool of humanity beneath them. We need to move quickly on those 4 shinobi. Ensure they make it from here to T&I before the council can intervene. If they make it back to their respective clans, we'll never get our hands on them again. Patience, Kakashi, patience. And what of our assigned escorts? Time was slipping away and he didn't have the full picture before his initial report was due to the Hokage. Despite his recent lackadaisical attitude towards punctuality, he would not be late this time. Here Bor sighed heavily. Rat and Mouse had the guard. Rat claims that they lost visual on the child during the chase and were too late to prevent what occurred. Inu raised an eyebrow beneath his mask. Their stories match. Bor shook his head in the negative. Send them both as a gift to Ibiki as well. It seems I owe that man more than a few drinks after this. Bor, a senior Anbu operative, actually flinched at the comment. Internally he wondered how Inu could see his answer looking in the opposite direction, but responded as a professional. Hi. Nezumi will be sent without delay. We are having trouble locating Rat. If there was any doubt left in Inu's mind, that statement crushed it. Hokage-sama would not be happy about this whole mess, but he would be even less happy about letting the rat bastard get away. He changed the channel on his radio and clicked his mic twice. After his short burst of traffic, the already agitated dog Nin turned to 2 of his most trusted Anbu. Wrap up here and draft the written report. I want it in my hands within the next 2 hours. I need to arrange for a guard rotation for the hospital room first. Inu turned his head just enough to observe the late arrival, his eyebrow raised imperceptibly behind his Anbu mask. Yes, Toki. For the gangly Anbu to come to him directly meant the news was important. Inu just hoped it was positive, as the morning had been full of nothing but crap thus far. Anbu guarding emergency access point India have apprehended Rat. Inu almost smiled at his early choice to turn over the handling of standard comms traffic to the efficient Nin while he ran this down. He was trying to sneak out of Konoha with his filthy tail between his legs under forged mission orders. It appears your notice went out over our emergency comms just in time. How so? Bor asked, the curiosity for a good story edging through his mask. They could almost see the ANBU's smirk under his mask when he responded with, he was waiting for KR clearance when you piped in. Toki scoffed loudly. He was surrounded by killers with nowhere to run. He chuckled as 2 of his audience vanished in swirls of angry wind and leaves. Inu growled underneath his mask as he sped off to T&I to meet its newest guest, the cat-faced Anbu hot on his tail. Buildings flew by in a blur as they crossed northwesterly across the large village, most of it still asleep. Light was just beginning to glare from tightly closed windows as they sped by. Below in the busy market district, shutters were being flung open, stoops were being swept clean, and rugs were being beaten fresh in preparation for the daily glut of traffic yet to come. In the back of Inu's mind, in that tiny pessimistic part of his brain that saw the worst in people, he began to dissect the average Konohan, those simple folk that claimed to embrace the will of fire and yet would cheer on the monsters that would murder in cold blood a defenseless child. Vessel to the mightiest demon to ever walk the earth. True, however, it was an innocent child all the same. He knew from many discussions with the Sandaime that the creature was most likely slumbering deep within the seal located on the boy's stomach, but what if the vicious attack had awakened it? What if they'd damaged the seal enough that the monster could escape and, once again, set fire to Konoha in order to finish what it started 6 years ago? How poetic would that be? Idiots, the entire lot of them. You could try to justify their ignorance through fear all you wanted, but the jaded captain knew to expect continued horrors from the lowest elements of the village so long as the boy was kept helpless. Anbu couldn't be everywhere and there weren't enough able bodies willing to help the isolated orphan indefinitely. Anbu were never meant to be babysitters. Sooner or later, if the child survived tonight that is, he would need to learn how to defend himself. This would be vitally important once he grew, as all children eventually did, and folks could no longer look past the cute exterior and began seeing him as the threat that he could be. Cubs grew into wolves at some point and wolves fought back when cornered. A demonic-powered wolf. The last Hitaki shook off the sudden shiver rattling his spine as they settled onto the winding stairwell leading them up to the observation lookout located halfway up Hokage Monument. Without skipping a beat, the tattoos on their shoulders pulsed, clearing the genjutsu, preventing the uninitiated from finding one of several controlled entrances to his home away from home. Not 2 seconds later, he was clearing the challenge from the 2 visible Anbu sentries, his head giving a discreet nod to the additional 4 waiting in the shadows, before continuing on from the kill room, the KR, into the hallway beyond, then down the pathway to the right leading to the holding pens below. Kill room was a choke point, a vital access space to highly sensitive buildings or bunkers where the person entering was put at a severe disadvantage. Those spaces were normally heavily reinforced, the walls often sealed to resist high-grade demolitions in addition to being reinforced concrete meters thick. There was always a narrow passage leading in followed by a narrow passage leading out, to restrict flow and bog down infiltrators while defenders either detonated staged defenses, usually more explosive notes or paralyzing seals, or launched violence on the attackers through murder holes cut into the walls. They were a helpful holdover from the Third War imported from Iwa back to the Land of Fire, a lesson Konoha paid terribly for in Leaf Blood. Inu shook his thoughts free once they were beyond the brightly lit chamber. The dark gave him time to think, to center himself. What he would be required to do in the next few minutes would make him want to vomit despite the hardened past of the war veteran. Breaking a comrade always left a vile taste in his throat. They were deep now, the warmer air of the upper levels giving way to cooler airstreams of the lower security brig level. One by one, they posted on the far side of a large pane of seal-reinforced safety glass to clear what most considered the first level of security. Inu knew it was actually the 4th and final chance for infiltrators to turn away. Beyond here, security only grew worse and often ended in death for the unskilled. Once through the vault-like door, they shot down through the next 3 stairwells into a square chamber void of furniture or decoration. Without pause, Neko followed him to the center of the room where floodlights revealed on the floor a circular pattern of ceiling work 3 meters in diameter. Inu placed his sandals firmly in the center. Challenge, a booming voice echoed over speakers hidden in the ceiling. Inu 0207. Active, access 4479 or 82 Delta. Neko noticed that the script surrounding the taiko on all sides was gaining a dull red glow, a dull glow transitioning to a much brighter one as he rifled off his registered access code. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened before the glowing light flashed green once then faded. Only then did Inu step from the circle and patiently wait while Neko repeated the process. Once the circle flashed green again, both operatives' glances upward and waited. Query. Came the same monotonous drone. Prisoner, Rat 1009er. Authorized. An angry buzzer sounded in conjunction with a flashing red light above one of 3 doors on the wall to the left side of the room. Both surged through knowing that the door would be accessible so long as the buzzer sounded and not a second longer. To miss it was to repeat the same challenge answer process with the added benefit of Anbu Analyzer, backed by an Anbu Black Kill Squad, dissecting every nervous tick and muscle response looking for infiltrators. To be honest, 5 seconds wasn't very long to clear the room, so you could not afford to dawdle. Beyond that large bedding chamber, the hallways radiated outward like a concrete reinforced spider's web, the subterranean threads filled with chamber after chamber of shinobi deviants. This section of the compound always made Inu twitchy. He'd spent a few months here after she died, the memory of it making his right hand flicker and clench. It was protocol really in friendly fire cases until the accused could be cleared, but being down here still brought back memories he'd rather forget, if he could. He'd need to visit them again soon and let them know how things were progressing. He forced himself to break away from that memory and focused forward where his feet were silently taking him and his Neko shadow. Each hallway beyond the spoke had the sterile quality of a mental ward. It was also lined along both sides with reinforced concrete walls embracing more seal-reinforced glass, the panels solid and unbroken. Inu knew that each cell had air holes, not vents, in the overhead to provide air and prevent escape, which wasn't a worry since each cell both restricted and disrupted chakra use on 3 levels he was aware of, and at least 2 too complicated for him to rationalize. Given the audience these rooms catered to, it was a sound precaution, not overkill. Besides, if worse came to worse and someone actually posed a valid escape risk, those air holes stopped providing charcoal-filtered sustenance and started churning out nasty derivatives of sarin gas, flooding the targeted cell, if necessary. Inu paused for 10 seconds to peek into the holding cell housing a young woman sitting placidly on the starched bed of her cell. The base was made of the same unyielding stone with a thin bedroll laid across it. There was no space beneath the slab holding her bed, the space between the top and the floor consisting of a solid slab of the material the walls were made of. A sterile metal toilet seat sat to one side of the room next to a sink of identical construction, and in the middle of the room sat a circular metal table with 2 stools. Nothing had sharp corners, not even the edges of the table and sink, and the air holes in the roof were easily 10 meters straight up. In that brief inspection, his eyes focused on the broken posture of the woman wearing plain white prison clothes matching her prison-style bedroll, the billowy shirt thin and most likely uncomfortable. The trousers were equally thin and non-complementary to her small yet Anbu-trained body. As the temperature was carefully modulated to a crisp 22.2 degrees Celsius setting, nothing needed to be overly cumbersome, and that prevented opportunities to store weapons and other tools. Worse still, as female prisoners were not afforded metal-laced undergarments or wraps, as the metal clips that kept them closed could be used for other purposes, their conditions kept such prisoners in a constant state of discomfort and vulnerability, meant to, as Ibiki always boasted, keep them pliable for later conversations. He needn't fear that she would recognize him. Those same chakra inhibitors prevented sensors from reading anyone right outside their cells. The planes of glass keeping her cell wide open to people allowed access to this part of the pens, as they were affectionately called, were tinted with just enough silver nitrate that people inside couldn't make out shapes in the darkened hallway. Just to be safe though, Ibiki spared no expense and limited the blindingly bright light in her cell to the floodlights mounted above her glass prison and turned so that they shone in her face the entire time her room was lit up. If they weren't dimmed during the authorized period of sleep, he doubted she would ever get any rest. Knowing approved shinobi sleep deprivation tactics, Inu surmised that may have been the original intent, but it wasn't like Mouse would have noticed given her current state. This tiny woman sitting on her horrible prison bed seemed lost to it all, her shoulders slumped, her hands resting listlessly in her lap, and her face sunken as it was. They hadn't begun the official questioning, but he could already tell. She'd withhold nothing once whoever Ibiki sent finally arrived, which should be soon if he missed his guess. Snapping his eyes away from the mousy brunette, Inu stepped quickly from the well-lit cell to his intended target 2 more doors down and scowled beneath his mask at the pacing figure presented by Anbu Rat. Former, he had to remind himself. He also couldn't help thinking that the hunchbacked nin had earned his moniker as he watched the condemned man pace back and forth in his cell. Bulbous nose and eyes, flared ears, recessive chin, greasy hair plastered in a stringy crown to his head, the man personified his Anbu avatar in more ways than one. Rat harbored in that rodent-like noggin a keen nose and sharp mind. Inu pushed the call button on the small gray box melded into the glass window and waited while the nervous fellow in the overly bright cell paused his frenzied pacing to glare, with one hand bridged over his eyes, to the large viewing pane. Knowing that Rat would only be able to see shadows on his side of the tinted, semi-one-way glass, he felt fairly confident that the voice distortion of the speaker box would make him mostly unrecognizable to the prisoner within. Oshiro Kenichi, Inu blared through the mechanical voice box, taking no pleasure in the involuntary flinch of his former peer. The Oshiro family was not a clan, but both sons were known for their service to the flame. The elder boy, Kazu, was part of the engineering division, a broad-backed Anbu with a gifted mind for puzzle solving, while Kenichi, well, Kenichi was Kenichi. Inu knew that calling him by his given name would drive home the crucial point of, "You are no longer one of us. You are one of them now, the ones you despised and belittled as you once locked them away. You are no longer special." Young Kenichi once made his family proud when he got the nod to join the Anbu. He was defying his fate and living up to the name his proud family had given him. Oh, the blow his arrest would be to them. "You have 2 minutes to tell me the truth. I would not waste this one chance you're being given." Inside, the former rat stiffened, his usual sign of distress, as he launched into a stuttering tale of being called off station to quell a small disturbance at the festival, of how he'd only been gone for 20 minutes. Hands pressed to the glass he couldn't see through, he pleaded his innocence and begged the mystery voice to, just ask Mouse. She'd be able to confirm everything he was saying. Inu called his bluff and depressed the button again. There were sufficient police force and Anbu patrols on duty near the festival to handle disturbances. You knew your assignment. He watched the frail man collapse on himself even as his mind frantically tried to work out an escape, a predictable habit. Rat's normal collapse under pressure did not disappoint. TT, they called. Needed backup. Child was safe with Mouse. Inu let him ramble on until a pair of handlers, the heavy combat Anbu that rotated prisoner duty as they relocated subjects from their cells to handily adjacent interrogation chambers, came in to hoist him away. When one clamped onto the smaller man's arms while the other slapped a seal transfer strip to Rat Kenichi's forehead, Inu merely shook his head at the struggling creature, screaming his innocence at the top of his lungs. Enko would get the truth from him eventually, but the terrorized man didn't need to know just yet that Mouse had given him up without a struggle. Time is up, Ken, the somber nin muttered to no one in particular. Kakashi knew it was a long shot, but the truth would come out quickly under Enko's gentle ministrations. At this point it was just a fact-finding exercise to corroborate the story provided. Long after Rat's cries disappeared down the blackened hallway, Inu turned on a heel and departed to find the nearest nin bar so he could work on his initial report. Neiko moved on to watch the interrogation of a man she'd wanted to gut years before. She never liked Rat all that much. Konoha General. 4 days later, Konohagakure no Sato. Dawn was breaking. Kakashi glanced quickly out of the window to his left just long enough to see the growing light reflect off a mirrored building next to the hospital courtyard before snatching his eyes back to the imperious figure standing in front of the same window overlooking the western half of the village. He left the bar, as he'd done several nights in a row now, unable to sleep, and found himself in the very spot he now stood, listening to the good doctor explain what Konoha's upstanding citizenry accomplished several nights ago. To say the atmosphere was tense would be a gross understatement. When the good doctor opened up with, "We should have lost the child if not for his tenant," well, that just sent the mood right down the crapper, didn't it? At that point, everyone in the room sighed internally, because the doctor's honest statement meant that the creature was awake but hadn't escaped for whatever reason. They'd give thanks to Yondaimi's unfathomable skill in Fuinjutsu later. For now, they were simply grateful that Konoha wasn't a smoking crater. That still left them with the aftermath of such a horrific attack on the unconscious child in the bed before them. Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, tried not to shake as he listened to the very nervous doctor next to him reading off the list of injuries suffered by a 6-year-old boy in his village. A 6-year-old boy he loved very much. Included were stab wounds to both vital and non-vital areas that should have outright slain the child. The fact that he had not died could only be attested to the Kyuubi's overwhelming need for self-preservation combined with its restriction. Inu the detached Anbu elite, along with his Hokage, could simply not fathom any other reason for the creature's assistance. For once, the old man was grateful to the creature of nightmares. However, there were limits to how beneficent the demon could be as a tenant, something Hiruzen noticed in the worried eyes of his old friend. Dr. Katsuo Yamakishi had serviced the Sarutobi clan for over 4 decades. Though he considered himself close to the Hokage, he never took that relationship for granted. Having been asked from the moment of the child's birth to be the sole medical representative to care for the orphaned Uzumaki, he had taken that responsibility to heart without reservation, and what he saw now, despite the years of documented mental, emotional, and physical abuse, sickened him to no end. As he gave his oral synopsis, Yamakishi-san tried to clear his throat yet again to buffer out his own fear, rage and frustration in order to give a clear and unbiased assessment of the child's overall health. The good doctor first noted that he had been present when the still bloody Anbu arrived carrying the broken body. In a very professional tone, he quickly summarized the young captain's initial medical assessment on the patient's level of consciousness, airway breathing and circulation, noting the inability to confirm spinal stabilization due to the egregious rate of blood loss. They had to take risks and stop the bleeding and clear the fluid from his airways first. Citing fear of imminent cardiopulmonary failure, the captain had opted for speed in order to reach advanced life support services, hoping that medic NINS could reverse any damage due to the subsequent trauma of transport. In Dr. Yamakishi's eyes, it was a necessary risk that saved the boy's life. The heavy sigh escaping the immobile Anbu officer in the corner was not amiss. From there, Yamakishi-san took personal charge of medical operations to repair and sustain the child's quality of life. As the patient was unconscious and unresponsive, the doctor immediately transitioned into a rapid medical assessment, establishing the patient's baseline vitals and trying desperately to identify any existing or potentially life-threatening conditions so they could focus on those medical emergencies first. It was during this phase of his report that the Hokage's anger flared, his ki lowering the room temperature drastically. There were just too many injuries, and, despite the Kyuubi's parallel efforts to save the boy, there were just too many leaks to plug, rips to heal, arteries to mend, and organs to replace and/or save. As it was, a team of 4 medic NINS were working with 5 apprentices to keep the damage stable while the demon's chakra healed the most serious damage. The small medical staff was amazed at what they were seeing transpire at the soft tissue level, but there just weren't any other medical personnel cleared or trusted enough to be in the room, so they were trying frantically to commit to memory the demon's work in saving a child that should have died hours before. It was frustrating, in more ways than one, as they were unable to record any of it for later research to later study and build upon this miraculous healing phenomenon, and the boy was healing at an unprecedented rate. So much was happening at the cellular level using chakra, and they couldn't take the time to study it due to lack of helping hands. The fact that less than 10 trustworthy medical staffers existed in a hospital staff of hundreds was not lost on the third Hokage. It was a fact he would remember well. Most of the critical structural injuries had healed or mostly healed while the boy was in transit with the demon's energy, or Yuki. The Kyuubi no Kitsune fought furiously to stem the leaking of life-giving blood from vital organs while generating enough new blood to keep oxygen flowing to the child's brain, preventing trauma and atrophy. The medic NINS could literally see the blood and pulsing red chakra flow, could see the soft tissue knitting itself back together. This accounted for the gallons of blood found at the scene of the crime and staining a young Anbu captain from neck to sandals. Unfortunately, Repeated jostling of the child during rapid transport to the hospital continually sent waves of pain due to the enormous number of broken and fractured bones, the repeated shocks risking paralysis or worse. Then there was the downside to the Yuki's rapid healing effects that made the Hokage grimace in sympathetic pain. Medic nins were going to have to re-break and reset every broken bone in the child's body to fully heal him. This is a process that would take several days and, as they could not trust sufficient numbers of the hospital staff to work on the Jinchuriki non-stop, they would have to do this over multiple operations conducted over multiple days, perhaps weeks. It was officially a nightmare of epic proportions. The boy would be in constant pain with no relief in sight for the near future. To make matters worse, the Kyuubi's recuperative powers were making anesthesia worthless unless it was being applied constantly. Naruto was building an impressive tolerance to anesthesia, his biorhythms constantly resetting to wakened levels, thus continuously refreshing the astronomical levels of pain and adrenaline almost immediately as his fight-or-flight reflex took hold. To keep the patient sedated, staff transitioned from traditional anesthesia to keeping the child's mind buried under deep layers of sleep-inducing therapy through direct chakra application to critical brain functions. They had to shut his mind down, so he wouldn't register what was being done to heal him. This had huge field applications and, better yet, it was one they could all learn to use through treating the boy. This could effectively open up life-saving surgery with combat med teams of 2 or more nins, and the potential future impacts in large-scale combat surgery were staggering. Through direct application of chakra to several parts of the brain involved in sleep, the med nins could actually rotate out when needed, thus prolonging their endurance. There was only one trustworthy anesthesiologist in the group and they couldn't go for 15 hours without exhaustion, but there were several med nins with the skill to induce forced slumber to the brain with much less chakra strain. They could effectively rotate out and catch their breath, so to speak. They would all still be exhausted when this was all done, but, for now, they could share the load. By the 4th rotation, they all had the process pretty much in hand and were gaining a much-needed education from the lone brain specialist in the group. Maintaining the correct chemical and hormonal balance required more concentration than simply doping large sections of the brain with anesthesia but less chakra, thus allowing the nins small breaks in the action. To keep the patient pliable, they would need to subvert normal operation in the brain's hypothalamus, the brain stem, the thalamus, the pineal gland, the basal forebrain, and the amygdala, simultaneously applying chakra directly to the base of the skull and through the temporal lobe. First off, they needed to suppress the suprachiasmatic nucleus within the hypothalamus, preventing information about light exposure and enabling greater control over the patient's behavioral rhythm. They were tricking his body into believing that it was always time to sleep, thereby modifying his sleep-wake cycle. They were effectively resetting his internal clock. Second, by shutting down triggers from the brain stem, they could add an additional buffer to the hypothalamus and reduce the brain's production of GABA, a chemical affecting arousal levels in the hypothalamus, while manually controlling activity levels in the stem's pons and medulla sections, thus preventing the deepest level of sleep, or REM. Entering REM sleep would relax the body too much, allowing him to enter a dream state, something that would be catastrophic if those dreams turned into nightmares brought on by recent physical trauma. They could not risk a thrashing patient in the middle of delicate surgical operations. Nins would need to keep him safely in stage 3 non-REM sleep for as long as possible. Third, they would need to artificially stimulate the pineal gland to enhance certain signals from the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a fine balance if they were to keep his internal clock in snooze mode. The trick was to increase the pineal gland's production of melatonin just enough to support but not surpass deep levels of non-REM sleep. This was a delicate balancing act. Lastly, triggering the basal forebrain to promote sleep while subduing the emotion-generating amygdala produced a final buffer layer from the external trauma of surgery to help keep the patient's brain effectively deadened to external stimuli. It was a medical work of art cobbled together out of desperation and the fear of chakra exhaustion. They could not fail the Hokage. They could not fail this child. With a heavy sigh, despite the miraculous teamwork used to save the comatose boy, the doctor's wandering thoughts, jarred by a subtle cough from the Hokage during his medical space out, returned to his grisly report. The patient suffered multiple lacerations and contusions. All major organs were punctured and hemorrhaging blood at unsustainable transfer rates. The fact that he did not bleed to death en route to the hospital is simply miraculous. The Anbu standing in the corner growled but did not take his eyes off the boy sleeping in the recovery bed. Seeing no additional comment, the doctor continued. Once critical organ function was restored, we proceeded to mend major soft tissue damage, reconnecting repeatedly perforated muscle tissue in the abdominal and thoracic regions. The Hokage's question made Yamakishi-san pause. Repeatedly perforated, doctor? The Hokage queried. Naruto was stabbed 47 times in the stomach, chest and neck regions of the body. Hiruzen's eyes grew slightly before he could still his face back into impassivity. In addition, we were forced to reconnect all major ligaments in his arms and legs. Someone had an impressive anatomical knowledge base. They were very thorough in making sure that he could not escape. Inu immediately thought of the Inuzuka suspected of participating. Pagu was part of the hunter division. For the first time the Hokage turned from the child and looked into Yamakishi's eyes before he spoke. And what of his eye, doctor? I am sorry, Hokage-sama. It can be replaced but not saved. We will try to match the remaining eye, but that is the best we can offer. The child has an unusual and very rare natural eye color. The Hokage nearly sagged in defeat. If he survived, the child would have a constant reminder of this night every time he looked in the mirror. He would start his day with a souvenir of how an angry mob tried to take his life on the day of his birth. Oh, how the Hokage hated this festival. If he could prove who from the council leaked the child's status as the Kyuubi container, he would string that person up publicly at next year's festival. That thought prompted him to his next course of action. What is your recommendation moving forward? If things progress normally, we will begin resetting his bones once his vitals have stabilized and we have conducted a detailed physical assessment. The mechanism of injury appears to be numerous blunt objects. We found multiple fist and foot impressions over 60% of his torso and lower extremities, so we must be cognizant of secondary and tertiary soft tissue damage. We had to reset his broken ribs and repair his fractured spinal column and skull to ease pressure to critical organs, so he should be out of the woods there. Now we need to correct his extremities, and then I'd like to keep him here for observation for the week following the last corrective procedure, which will be the eye replacement. The Hokage nodded his permission, sending the tired doctor off for much-needed and well-deserved rest before turning to the shivering Anbu. It didn't require a Hokage to see that Inu was angry. His whole body literally vibrated with rage. Admirable though his anger may be, Hiruzen knew that Inu did not know the boy's true origins, otherwise he'd be addressing many more corpses, so this emotion could only be in response to a drunken mob willing to attack an innocent child, any child. Right now, however, he needed him focused on the remaining tasks at hand. Captain. Inu snapped to attention and focused on his commander-in-chief. I will want you present when the offenders are released from Ibiki's custody. Make sure that Anko is present as well when the final report is given. Immediately the ANBU's chakra resonated with anticipation. He knew full well what the Snake Princess's reaction to these bastards would be, and he planned to watch as much as he could for as long as he could. Also, assign your best team to guard the child lest our more motivated citizens seek to continue the festival's remembrance. Inu's response was brief, immediate, and professional. With a response of, "Hi, Hokage-sama," he vanished in a swirl of leaves, his body bent at the waist. Hiruzen turned to the boy wrapped in bandages and wished him strength in the week to come. He would try to visit and lend some of his own strength when he could. With a tear rolling down his wrinkled cheek, the old man vanished without a sound. Deep below Konoha, in the dark environs where sunlight fled the evil of men, a figure swathed in robes and bandages imperiously lorded over the kneeling figures beneath his dais throne. A single eye flickered between individuals as his mind recorded and filed each mission recount, the right side of his head wrapped up eerily similar to a convalescing Jinchuriki resting in Konoha General. With a quick nod in the dimly lit chamber, the three masked figures before him vanished into the shadows as a fourth shuffled silently but quickly into the room, assuming a similar pose with their neck bent and one knee pressed to the stone floor, the other knee bent and supporting their hands. "What have you learned?" the mummified shinobi rasped out, the cross-shaped scar on his chin wrinkling with his barely suppressed interest, his lower lip rising ever so slightly when he awaited news of something important. "The vessel is stable, Danzo-sama. He currently rests in the high-security ward on the second sublevel. Doctors appear pleased with his recovery rate and plan to relocate to a more accessible location if the next few surgeries prove equally promising." The figure identified as Danzo appeared displeased. The soft-hearted fools would squander high security and risk the container to further reprisal, tisk. The agent was monotone in his ongoing report. "If I may, Danzo-sama." He waited for permission to continue, like all well-trained tools should. Danzo happily noted, though he'd never let on he was pleased. "Konoha believes that the standard 222 Anbu rotation is sufficient to protect the vessel while he recovers. The move was predicated based on access to direct sunlight." Danzo scoffed at the old wives' tale about sunlight being good for recovering medical patients and young children. Any signs of the seal weakening post-attack? This part was crucial. "Negative, Danzo-sama. The demon." "Biju," Danzo calmly interrupted. He was nothing if not precise. "Pardon, Danzo-sama. The Biju made no apparent attempts to escape the seal that we could detect." Conversations between the doctor and the Hokage appear to confirm that the entity was more focused on healing the container rather than taking the opportunity to flee and wreak more havoc. Danzo's one visible eye narrowed in thought. The creature must have bonded at some point with the child to forego its freedom. That is a point we might be able to use to gain leverage over it. That concludes this agent's report, Danzo-sama. The mummified shinobi nodded ever so slightly, acknowledging the figure's satisfactory performance. "Make sure we establish a proper guard over the weapon. We cannot afford to let Konoha bungle its safety before we can gain control. Use 4th platoon to fill the roster. 0 body count unless another attack on the weapon's safety appears unavoidable." Danzo only had the one unit comprised of 4 platoon-sized forces, but they were highly trained, more so than Konoha's soft-hearted shinobi. He was confident they would succeed where Hiruzen's pathetic nin would continue to fail. Just because the beast had not retaliated, didn't mean that it wouldn't eventually. By then, Danzo wanted to be firmly in control of the reins.